Hey friends, have you ever been dropped from a friendship? Have you ever been canceled or erased from someone's memory, it seems? Have you ever been unilaterally and without warning placed into what feels like the witness protection program of ministry or of church life? Well, if so, then this is the episode for you. We are going to talk today about getting ghosted in gospel ministry. And if it's happened to you, you know exactly what this title is and feels like. And I welcome you back to Leading in the Gospel. I'm Cary, and my guest today is Pastor Skelly from the Faith Baptist Church in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Kurt, welcome back.
It is good to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we are. I'm so thankful that you would be part of this episode with me. I think that this is something you understand. You've taught about it, and you and I have talked about it over the years. We've seen it. We've experienced it. And so we're going to jump into getting ghosted. We might make this 2 episodes, depending on how long the conversation goes. But before we jump into the topics, I want to share with the listeners, Kurt, what's going on with a couple things that we're both involved with. And first, I want to apologize to our listeners. We have not been up on episodes lately in terms of just getting the podcast published. We haven't forgotten you. If you're listening to this, thank you for sticking with us. We're in talks. I'm in talks with a mainstream media ministry that is going to bring Leading in the Gospel into their family of programs. And so we've been working on that. And I don't have permission yet to announce it or tell you where it's going, but I think in the next couple months that's going to come together. Kurt's going to be a big part of that with me as well. And so we're looking forward to it. But Kurt, first, let's talk about leading in the gospel. And I want you to share a little bit, but if you're a listener, I want you to write this down, September 29th to October 2nd, Leading in the Gospel Refuel at Disney World. We're staying at the Contemporary Resort. We have 50 rooms reserved. We will fill up. Now is the time to get registered. Between now and May 1st, you're going to save on the early registration costs. We will spend the mornings, 8 to noon, mentoring pastors and their wives. It's just a pastors and wife kind of event. It's highly relational. At noon, from the rest of the day, it's friendships, it's fellowship, it's parks and shopping and dining and enjoying the weather and the friendships. It's encouraging, it's life-giving, life-building. And Kurt will be a speaker. He'll take a day. I'm going to take a morning. And I'm excited. This is the first time I've announced this, but a friend of mine named Bob Dahl will be our guest for the 3rd day of mentoring. Bob was the CEO of Merrill Lynch, and that got bought by BlackRock. And then Bob was fired from BlackRock. He was the number 3 man at BlackRock, and he was fired because he is a believer in Jesus, committed Christian, and it was devastating. And today, Bob is a faithful leader in his local church, and he loves pastors, and he has agreed to come and give us a morning and mentor and talk to us about local church life through the eyes of a successful business leader who is receiving the ministry of a local church. So I'm excited about that, Kurt, that Bob's coming. Take a minute, Kurt. You've been a part of all of these, except for the 1 year you were sick. Share with us what is Leading in the Gospel. Refuel.
Well, I find it interesting that you talked about Bob Dahl getting fired for his testimony, and we're having a session on ghosting. So that might be helpful just to hear from him. But it is such a great schedule. We start on a Monday evening, and then, as you said, we just spend mornings, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning, and it's so collaborative. I think that your plan at the beginning was, how can we have a conference that's not a conference, bring people together, but not so many people that we don't know each other, can't collaborate? What's that sweet spot? And we actually talked about, do we make it bigger? Do we make it smaller? And what I've observed in just the years that I've gone is that 50 couple mark is just about perfect, because you get to know everybody that's there. No doubt there'll be people there that you already know. There's nothing that draws us together except for a mutual love for the gospel, a love for the Lord, I mean, we're all different. We come from different places, but I always walk away from those 4 days with a full heart and a ton of great ideas. And I would love for, if you're listening to this or watching this right now, I would love for you to come and just sit around one of the round tables. Your wife will thank you over and over again, because it's not one of these places where you go in and you have to perform or be something that you're not. Yeah. Just come, be yourself, listen, bring an open heart, and just determine that this will be a time for you to re-energize as a couple in ministry. It really is that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like half pastor's conference, half marriage retreat, half vacation. It's like it's a little bit of all that. It
is. And it's just rich. It's become my favorite thing every year that I do in the ministry to others, in terms of travel. Can you take a minute and talk about the investment? It is pricier because we're going to this contemporary resort, and we're going to parks and enjoying the Disney World grounds and resorts. But I've never met a team of deacons that didn't want their pastor to go to this, and help cover the cost. I've never met a church of any size that didn't find that it was a worthy investment. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I mean, it's way cheaper than going to Greece or Israel. So, and what I have found is that deacons and church boards are really, really keen on getting their pastor to a place where they're going to be healthier and getting to a place where they're going to be more effective in ministry. So, and I love the term that you used. It really is an investment. And I would even say this, even if you don't get help from your church to be able to send you, but I think in most cases you would, and sometimes it's just a matter of asking the right person. But even if you don't, it really is so worth the investment. It's every bit of what you'd pay if you went on a week vacation, but to come and do it this way, it's priceless.
Yeah. So inthegospel.com is where you can register for this and reserve your spot. I think sometimes Disney will float us up to 55 or 60 rooms. We would probably cap it for sure around 60. But now's the time to save on the early registration, inthegospel.com. Now, Kurt mentioned Israel and Greece. Also, when you go to inthegospel.com, you'll see a link for our upcoming Greece trip in November, and we're nearly full on that. But Kurt, we're doing that in partnership with you. Share a little bit about that trip, and maybe there's some listeners that'll join us with that.
Yeah, so honestly, Greece was not something on my radar screen back in the day. Cary, you and I have been to Israel together on numbers of occasions. And as most of you know, I started a tour company called Land of the Bible Tours, and Cary and a ton of other pastors have been really gracious to use our company. But the big news is that during this tension that Israel had over the past year, we kind of had to look at some other options. And so, Cary, you and I talked about it. We went to Greece together, and what we discovered is, wow, I mean, you learn so much, especially about Paul's second missionary journey, going to places like Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea and Athens and Corinth and Ephesus and Patmos. And I mean, the list goes on. It really is every bit as much informative as an Israel trip. But then you add to it, it's a little bit more relaxing. Israel is go, go, go every day, but because a part of the trip in Greece includes a 3-day cruise, it almost forces you to just relax a bit, slow down. So it's less taxing. It's just as informational, but it's really a refreshing trip to go together. And honestly, having gone now 7 or 8 times, I just wouldn't miss it. I would put it on my bucket list as a thing to do. And Cary, your trip in November, I'll also be in country at that time. Your trip is going to be epic. It's really, really going to be good. The great thing about going in November is you're beyond the high season. So it's not just wall-to-wall people, but the weather is still just perfect. And
Yep.
I don't know about where you all are listening from, but I know in New England, it's already getting cold in November. So it's a nice little break to go and go on that trip.
I would just say, if you're a pastor, this is an essential. My one regret is that I was in my late 40s and early 50s before I started making these trips. It was just God's providence and will in my life, the way it unfolded. I would say the sooner you can get to Israel, the sooner you can get to Greece and do this trip. It just totally transforms your understanding of Scripture and your teaching of Scripture. So, Kurt, take just a quick minute, and we're going to jump into our topic here. But tell us about Israel and land of the Bible, and what have you got coming up next? Because I think the guys should get to that.
Sure. Yeah. So I know that many of you that are listening now to this podcast are ministry leaders. And I would say to you, first of all, Israel's completely safe. It's wide open. I took a group of pastors here in January. I'll take another group of pastors here in May. And then all of our fall trips are just full right now. So things are really going well. If you ever want to lead a trip or take a group, just contact me sooner than later, because 2026 is absolutely filling up. But what you want to do is come with Cary and me on one of our pastors' trips. The next one I think that you could probably get in on would be January 13th through the 23rd. And it's the country is empty in January. We get these sites almost to ourselves. It's really like a little in the gospel, leading in the gospel on the road, because we're in biblical sites all day long. Then in the evenings at the hotel rooms, we're just sitting in the lobby, sipping coffee and solving all the ministry problems of the world. Yeah. So it's great. And then I would say this: if you're not a pastor or a ministry leader, just jump in. Jump in on one of our trips. Go with Cary. You can go with me. Just go to the website, landofthebible.org. And you owe it to yourself and to your investment in your whatever class you teach or the people that you mentor to get the hermeneutic that only an experience in Israel can provide. It's safe, it's open, and we want you to go.
Okay, so enough talk of all this fun stuff. Let's get to the painful stuff.
I was hoping we could talk a little bit more about this other stuff.
I know. We're both kind of putting off. We don't want to talk about this because it's painful. And yet, I imagine there are hundreds and hundreds of people that clicked play on this because they know the pain. They know the feeling of being canceled or erased or forgotten or somehow otherwise marginalized or buried. And so, Kurt, let's start by talking about a definition of getting ghosted. And in my simplest terms, it's a relational disconnect that is more or less one-sided, that catches you by surprise. You weren't expecting it. And it can, number one, cause a lot of confusion and question, but then just some personal floundering, like disorientation. But how do you define getting ghosted in gospel ministry?
Yeah, so like probably many of you, when I have a question, one of my go-tos now is AI. And the key to AI is giving it the right prompts. And so I really tried to explain to AI, here's what ghosting means to me in a ministry context. People that used to be there for me, or people that used to call me friend, who have treat me as if I don't exist anymore. And I kind of fed in a bunch of those thoughts. And here's what it spit out to me. And I thought this was good. Ghosting, the sudden and unexplained cessation of communication, engagement, or relationship by someone who previously shared a close, cooperative, or trusted connection, often without providing any explanation or closure. And then it goes on to say this, and I thought this was good as well. This act typically leaves the affected individual feeling, this is why we were reluctant to start this podcast, because this is what it does to you. It leaves the individual feeling abandoned, disregarded, confused, especially when there was once mutual respect, trust, or collaboration. So I know that's long, but that was so accurate, at least in my own experience.
Just about everybody that hears this episode is going to click rewind and listen to that 2 more times. And that's why I'm not going to make you say it again. But it's like, as I'm hearing you read it, I'm thinking of it as a checklist, and I'm checking every box in my head in terms of the experience and then the results and the feelings and how that plays out. And Kurt, it's painful.
It is.
It hurts.
It is painful.
And it's confusing.
And yet you think about this, and I know I'm jumping way ahead right now, but it is those experiences of pain that teach us the most about God and about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so those painful things do have beneficial outcomes, and we're going to get there. But wow, there's no denying the pain of it.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were reading the definition, I want our listeners to have kind of 2 contexts of ghosting, and maybe there's a third or fourth that you can think of, but I think any pastor or spiritual leader that's worked in a local church has experienced this, oh goodness, dozens, if not hundreds of times, up close, internally, where, I think this happens to me every other week at least, where there's someone that was a part of the church and you were growing with and you were connecting with, and you thought there was this budding friendship, relationship, collaborative, shared values, shared, church life, church community. And on your side of the equation, it was genuine. It was real. It wasn't transactional. There was no agenda. You're pursuing the Lord and doing gospel ministry. And suddenly this person is gone, gone. No word, no bye, no thank you. Not that you need thanks, but just no. The key, I think, to the definition that you quoted was no explanation, no closure. Kurt, give me closure, give me an explanation, and I'm good. Right. I'm like,
I don't even have to agree with it. Just at least you're telling me that there is a reason that you can verbalize.
And I can accept anybody's reason for any reason. There are two kinds of people that leave a church. There are those that say, "Hey, pastor, we're stepping away because of this and this and this." And honestly, usually those people, it's usually work or distance, or they're moving or something like that. And there's goodwill, and usually there's we've enjoyed our time here, thank you. It's those that are just gone, vacated, like whatever happened to that person.
And I would even add, there are people that leave church for expressed reasons of disagreement. Like, I don't agree with your music, or I don't agree with your style, and that's okay too. That's okay too. We understand that people have different perspectives on any number of issues like this. And I always appreciate when somebody says, "Hey, in good conscience." And in those situations, I even try to help them find a place that might be more fitting to them. But it's like you say, when there's just, they were here and they're gone, and what happened?
Yeah. Spiritual and emotional maturity can take even disagreement and go, "Hey, let's peaceably disagree, and let me help you find the right place." But so the internal context I want us to have in mind. I want us to have in mind, I think a lot of people have experienced an external kind of ghosting from a person they thought was their friend, a person they thought was a collaborator, or a ministry colleague. So the external, that's painful as well. Anything you want to add in terms of the context, the internal, external?
No, I would say that broadly, those are really good categories, because I feel as if everybody that's listening right now can think of situations in your own life where both of those categorically have been true. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a definition, a working definition. We've got the context of internal, external. Let's talk for a minute about the experience, the emotional and spiritual toll that being ghosted can have on the recipient. And I don't want to spend a lot of time here, because the point of this podcast is not that we wallow around in our victimhood, or in our psychosis. You know what I'm saying? I feel like I want to understand the emotions. I don't want to play around in them. I don't want to just wade out and soak in them. So, a lot of podcasts that talk about this kind of stuff, that's about all it is. It's like, let's just mutually empathize over our shared victimhood. I really want to get quickly to moving forward.
Yes.
But let's definitely identify for a minute to the emotional experience and the toll it can take, because some listeners are there. What do you say is the deepest impact of the pain? What's the experience?
I think to me, I can't speak for everybody, but I think for me, the biggest impact is disillusionment. And what I mean by disillusionment is all of a sudden you realize, oh, I was more vested in this relationship that I thought this was reciprocal. And here's the way I've said it. The pain of losing that relationship is not so much the loss of future fellowship, although there is that pain. Like, wow, I miss going to that shared conference. I miss having that phone call or those times together. So certainly you do miss what could have been, but the greatest pain is realizing that the past relationship was a farce. That's the greatest pain. So the pain is not the loss of future fellowship. It's the realization that past fellowship was something other than a real relationship. You were being commoditized or whatever. That's the pain of it.
Yeah, you said it so well. I'll tell you, this happened to me once, and I was actually seeking some counsel from another mentor, someone similar to you in terms of a little bit ahead of me in pastoring and just ministry life, and someone that I call when I have a personal need I'm trying to understand. And I talked through the experience, and this man, very wisely, I'll never forget this, he said, "Cary, you are grieving the loss of what you thought the relationship was."
That's it.
And he let that sink in, and it hit me. It's like, oh, number one, it is grieving. I was grieving. And he said, you're grieving loss. You've lost something. And he said, this was brilliant. He said, you've lost what you thought the relationship was. And then he said, it never was that.
Right.
But you thought it was.
Right.
And you had emotionally, relationally, spiritually invested yourself into what you thought the relationship was. And when the mask is ripped off, when it turns out to be so disposable and expendable and transactional or utilitarian, you feel used and betrayed. And you use the word commoditize. Is that a word?
Yes.
Yes.
It is now.
Yeah, we made it one. But you feel so...
right. Used. Yeah.
Yeah.
Objectified.
Objectified. And that is painful. And there's sorrow and there's grief. There's a process of grieving. So if I wanted to dip into that because if you're feeling that, if you've been ghosted, and I will tell you, the internal aspect of that, in our local churches, maybe you would say this differently, Kurt, or maybe you'd have a comment on it. I don't think you can sustain being a pastor if you don't learn how to receive that experience and work through it, because there isn't a pastoral experience that's true to shepherding that isn't going to go through this over and over and over. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. And you can't know the fellowship of his sufferings unless you have experienced that. Because, Jesus was the ultimate one who was ghosted. And those that were most invested in were those that in many cases walked away. And all biblical leaders dealt with this. Everyone has that person that they felt like was, wow, but what happened?
So the feelings are normal. The grief is real. The sorrow, the loss is real. Now, this same advisor said to me, there may be nothing you can ever do to repair or restore or even build from the ground up what you thought the relationship was. But that, and this was powerful, that only has as much power in your life as you choose to give it going forward. So we're going to talk about responses in a minute. But there was this stark realization when I realized there was nothing I could do that I hadn't already tried. There was nothing in my power that I could do to fix what was lost.
And I think maybe up until that point, and I'm not sure exactly, all the details of your situation, but I think sometimes up until that point, generally speaking, we are trying to restore. And I think the definition itself is what helps us to realize, well, you can't restore what was not. What was not, it wasn't ever that. So you can't restore something that wasn't there in the first place. So I like how you framed it then and said, or even build from the ground up.
Yes, yeah. So just to put a pin here, pastors, you're going to get ghosted in local church ministry. And the thing is, Kurt, you can't be so vulnerable to it that it flattens you every time, because you'll just never get up. You'll always be grieving. But and here's I think it's dangerous. You can't get so calloused to it that you withdraw from every relationship because everybody has the chance of doing this to you. You can't get so callous that you refuse to make yourself vulnerable. Hey, let's face it, to be a pastor, and genuinely love, we're putting ourselves out for risk. We're making ourselves vulnerable to people, and a good number of those people over time are going to ghost us. Now, praise God, a good number of them are never going to ghost us.
Right.
Like you've only ghosted me about 2 times, but we've restored it every time.
It's actually been 4, but I think there are only 2 times that you noticed.
Okay. Now, how many times have I ghosted you?
Including today?
Well, after today.
Oh my. I'd have to get out my calculator.
Yeah, probably. Anyway, all right, let's move on to, now this is an interesting question that I wrote and thought through. Why? And I want to talk about each of the contexts. Why do people inside the church ghost us? And then why do other friends outside the church, leaders, collaborators, colleagues, why do they ghost us? When this happens, let's break down some reasons why. And let's start with the inside. Let's start with the person that is just disappeared from church. And I'll let you start, and then I'll tap in. Why do people walk away and they never say goodbye?
I think there could be any number of reasons. I think at the heart of it is a refusal to have the difficult conversation. So I'm thinking about people like in my circles of the churches I've pastored, people that I've been close to that have done exactly what you just described. And in almost every situation, because I go chasing people. I'm going to ask, I'm going to call, I'm going to email, what's wrong? And maybe that's an insecurity in me, but I want to know. And in several of those situations, it was just a matter of they didn't know how to broach the topic. They didn't know how to say something, or in some instances there was misinformation. We know that a whisperer can separate chief friends. And sometimes it's just a matter of information sources and all of that. But in situations where there has been irrational and unexplained ghosting and not even the answering of a text or answering of a phone call, why do people do that? I think that's part of the plague of the disillusionment, because we want to rationalize it. And something my dad taught me years ago is you cannot rationalize with irrational people. You're looking for a rational reason why they've done this. And your mind really doesn't want to go to the place where, well, maybe I was just somebody they were using for such a time as this, and now that they've extracted from me whatever benefit they can get, as like any other commodity, I am no longer usable and beneficial, and they've moved on, and they see no reason in maybe their narcissistic mindset to even acknowledge that.
Yeah. I want to insert here that, I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians profile of love. And I would say to our listeners, there are uncharitable and charitable explanations. And I think our flesh and our grieving selves gravitate to the worst possible explanations, the most hurtful, the most malicious. But I think that for our own spiritual health, a biblical, gracious, loving response deliberately leans into the most charitable explanations. For instance, someone leaves my church and someone I was close to or co-laboring with or thought had a good relationship with, suddenly they're gone, didn't say goodbye, didn't say, it's been nice knowing you. I could come up with malicious reasons, maybe they're angry, maybe they're whatever. Or I could come up with more benign reasons. Maybe they were just afraid. Maybe they're emotionally and spiritually less mature and find it difficult to enter into conversations like this.
Or maybe they think that you wouldn't have cared. Like maybe they have projected upon you that you wouldn't notice. Right.
So, big picture, I want to encourage our listeners, as I would encourage my own heart, lean into the best plausible, most charitable option for your own assumption. And that's going to be better for your own heart, okay? For instance, in one situation in my life, I think the motive was probably more that my presence, my face, my voice in this person's life was a source of grief or sorrow or pain. And so they found it easier just to not deal with me. And that was my most charitable way, Now in your case, Kurt, you're a pain to me, but I still reach out in love to you.
Yeah,
because,
and I appreciate that.
I'm gracious that way. No. So here, I'm going to list a few things, and if you want to comment on them. So fear of confrontation, I think we've covered that. Shame or guilt. And, let's talk about for a second, sometimes people leave the church and don't want to talk to pastor. Why? Because they're doing this for really shameful reasons, or they're in sin. They're getting away from God. And I'm not saying that in a judgy way. They're just walking away spiritually. And the last thing they want to do is tell you that.
Right.
Yeah.
That absolutely.
Cultural factors. And hey, let's face it, we live in a world where this is normal. With the digital world, digital communication, block, silence, mute, hey, we live in the Shark Tank world. You're dead to me,
Yep.
Disillusionment. And by the way, I would kind of attach to this word unmet expectations. I think sometimes people entered into a relationship with unspoken agenda or expectations, and when you didn't meet them, they just check out.
Right, and this is very true for some of you that are listening that maybe are in maybe you started a church or you took a small congregation and God is blessed and you're growing, and sometimes people that felt like they had that special in with you. You don't feel any differently about them. You love them just as much as you ever have. But, I mean, your time can only go in so many directions, and maybe they feel as if you've changed where you really haven't changed. You've just tried to be what you need to be for a growing congregation, and they have become disillusioned with you for that.
Yeah. So here's a good kind of closing thought on this. Ghosting definitely reveals a deeper issue. It could be personal, it could be spiritual, it could be relational, it could be circumstantial in that person's life that they don't want to talk to you about it. Maybe that can be addressed, maybe not. But here's what gives me a sense of peace that keeps me going forward in ministry instead of wanting to quit or instead of these things breaking me. The reason a person ghosted me is if they're not giving me the chance to make it my issue, it's not my issue. You know what I'm saying, Kurt? Mm-hmm. If I don't have the capability to speak into it, resolve it, reconcile, then if I've done everything in my ability to be at peace, then it's not my issue. It's no longer even my responsibility. And in that, I can relinquish, I can release this person to God's grace, and I can move forward in peace with a sincerely peaceable spirit towards that person, and in God's grace move forward.
Yeah, that revelation goes both ways. You know, I think there are those clues that reveal the person that's doing the ghosting. But wow, you know, the being ghosted reveals to you things about yourself. And we look inward first, and we ask, you know, in what ways have I contributed to this? You know, if in fact I have. And then we ask questions like, wow, this stings. Am I guilty of doing this to somebody else, albeit sometimes unwittingly? Have I done this? So I think that, you know, the pain of it is multifaceted, because initially you're into self-care, but eventually by God's grace, then you really are thinking through, is restoration possible? How can I be gracious to one who has taken an opposition to me? Am I doing this to others? You know, what is the way forward? You know, have I contributed to this situation? Yeah.
Let's talk for a minute about why do colleagues ghost each other? Why do Christian leaders and co-laborers? So let's go to the external. So we talked internally, friends and co-laborers in our church, but let's talk about the broader picture. And again, it's a surprising experience. But what comes to your mind when you think about why leaders cancel each other, why colleagues cancel each other?
Oh my! You know, I take to heart what you said a couple of minutes ago. That I don't want to engage in evil surmising. You know, I don't want to assign motives. What are some potential reasons why people ghost people? Maybe it speaks to a character flaw in. Okay, for instance, if you're this person, if you find that it's very easy to walk away from what were once trusted and close relationships, and you feel no compunctions about it, then what I would say to you, if that's you, and I'm speaking to myself, and let's speak to those, all of us that have done this at least to a degree, I would say, what is it about me that can do that? How can I so readily and arbitrarily and cavalierly remove myself from a relationship? I think that the answer to that is it wasn't a relationship. It was a situation in which I was receiving some perceived benefit, and now that I no longer perceive the benefit that comes from that, I no longer need this relationship. So I think it really speaks to the nature of the past relationship, and maybe it's the fact that it wasn't that at all. Yeah.
It's the discovery that the relationship was transactional.
Right.
Instead,
you said it in your which book was it where you said you talked about real friends and deal friends. Yeah.
And I got that from another book, Strength to Strength. I think the author's name is Arthur Brooks. And he talks about real friends and deal friends. You know, deal friends are the transactional friendships. And, you know, I want to caveat that any good friendship, there's mutual benefit. There's reciprocal benefit. Like Kurt, you and I, we have blessed each other. At least I know I've blessed you. I don't know if you've blessed me. No, I'm kidding. We have mutually benefited each other.
100%. Yeah.
But truly, I don't think our friendship is transactional, because we've been friends for 35 years, and long seasons of that friendship, we weren't really mutually benefiting. But our friendship was 100% intact the whole way.
Right.
We've gone seasons where we didn't even have any contact with each other for some weeks or months, but that hasn't changed it. You know what I'm saying?
No. That's a good distinction.
So a short list of why I think colleagues sever or disconnect. I think the most common and easiest to come by is just the avoidance of a difficult conversation. Whether I disagree with you, whether I don't have time for you, whether you hurt me, whatever the situation is, it says I don't have the emotional bandwidth or maturity to sit down and reasonably explain to you why I can't continue this friendship or why I don't desire to.
But I think that's twofold. I think number one, that speaks to the nature of love. Do I love somebody with whom I'm unwilling to have that conversation? And the biblical answer to that is no. That you do not, because love pushes into those conversations. Love bravely has those conversations. And if you're unwilling to have a difficult conversation, this would go to any relationship in our life, then that in itself is a red flag to you that you are behaving unlovingly.
And it's fear. So perfect love casts out fear.
Yep.
The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. And when I'm unwilling to have that conversation, underneath all the layers, it's fear. I'm afraid to have that conversation, and fear is tugging against love. And we could go down that road a long ways, but that it's a charitable conclusion to go, I think that person ghosted me because it's too uncomfortable for them to enter into the conversation I wish we could have. And I'm going to love them anyway. I'm going to love them as someone who's not able to have the conversation I wish I could have.
Right. And
anyway,
be willing to be the initiator of that conversation.
Absolutely. But okay, let's say you try to initiate it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. At some point you have to go, I've done what I can do.
That's exactly right. But at least you have the conscience of saying, I've made an effort to have this conversation.
Yes. Okay. Here's another one. Maybe a fear of backlash, be it public, be it internal, but a fear
backlash in what way?
Okay. So social media makes everything, but a backlash in terms of maybe this doesn't go well. Maybe it goes onto social media. Maybe there's a confrontation here that's going to get bigger than I want to manage or deal with. I think fear. I think fear is at the bottom of both of those. Here's one that to me makes a lot of sense. Just being overwhelmed in terms of life priorities. Maybe this person has disconnected from me because they've got too many things pulling on them and they simply have to prioritize. And I happen to fall into the category that
of unprioritized. Yeah.
I didn't make it into the top tier of priorities because of the box this person exists in, whether it's ministry, family, whether it's financial or otherwise. Maybe this person is so encumbered with what they have to deal with that I've fallen off the grid.
And here's where you'll know that that's true, because that certainly is a great point. And we all have experienced maybe that in the sense of, we used to be closer, but we're both busy. But here's where you know that's not true, because inevitably there come times when circumstances or shared relationships or activities bring us together. And when there's awkwardness and dismissal, then you can know it really wasn't a busyness thing. It was something deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. So Unresolved personal issues, I would add that to the list. Again, that just falls into the same category of a person that's avoiding you, that doesn't want to have the difficult conversation. They have to maybe own something they don't want to talk about. The probably the least charitable explanation is that this person no longer values you. And again, that speaks to the relationship was transactional. It was utilitarian. You were welcomed in because of your function.
Right.
And your inherent value functionally to the relationship or to the ministry or to the context. And suddenly you're no longer of value to the agenda of that person. And so they find you disposable or expendable. And that, again, I think that's the least charitable explanation. Sometimes it's the true explanation.
Right.
But for the receiver, I think it's the most painful explanation.
Yes.
And it always feels like that's what's going on when we are ghosted.
Right.
So Kurt,
because we're
predisposed.
We're predisposed to believe, especially with the people that we earnestly love and we feel deeply about a relationship, and then to realize that there was never that reciprocal feeling, there was never that reciprocal loyalty, and when it becomes abundantly clear, and that takes time, as you sort through it. But when it makes clear based upon repeated appeals or trying to initiate those hard conversations we just talked about, when it becomes clear that no, that this is the new normal, which is actually just a surfaced old normal, that's difficult.
Yeah. So, Kurt, we are 45 minutes in. We have diagnosed, we've talked about the emotion, we've defined it. We've talked about why, and I think we've uncovered some really good, expansive perspectives on why might this person be canceling me. And I want to pause this episode here, but not without hope. I want to say to our listeners, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to revisit this in the next episode, and we're going to talk about responses. Here's the question we're going to answer in the next episode. How does the gospel give us resources for responding to ghosting? And I want to say there is hope. There is hope, number one, for you. You can survive this spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. You can survive this in ministry, internally, externally. You can survive this in terms of companionship. God will heal your heart. He will strengthen you with good friends, non-transactional friends. And I want to just tease out a little bit. You're going to survive this relationship that's lost for now. There might even be hope for that relationship. And Kurt, in the next episode, we're going to talk about some biblical relationships where ghosting happened. Sometimes there was recovery and return. Sometimes there wasn't. So in the next episode, we're going to deal specifically with our responses now that we understand this experience and the emotional toll. And so I want to wrap up very quickly and remind our listeners that you can register for the events we talked about at inthegospel.com. You can also find the new second edition of the Done book at inthegospel.com. And hundreds of churches are using this in their outreach, in their gifts to their visitors, to their guests. And I can just tell you, for our church, we are seeing tremendous fruit from the gospel presentation that's in the Done book. And so I hope you'll go to In the Gospel, especially as we prepare for Easter, and give this to your guests and let your church family use it as an outreach tool. And there's other things at inthegospel.com. Kurt, take 30 seconds and tell the listeners about Everyday Truth.
Yeah, so Everyday Truth is just exactly that. It's we go through books of the Bible every day, Monday through Friday, and we're in the book of Matthew right now. People struggle having their devotions daily. If I can be a resource for you just to help you be in the Bible every day, then tune in and join us.
So thanks for joining us for this. I think this is one of our most important and significant episodes of Leading in the Gospel. How do we work through spiritually, respond graciously in a gospel-shaped way to being ghosted? So don't miss the next episode as we talk about responding to getting ghosted. And until then, keep leading in the gospel.